Hello and welcome. The day has gone, but the night has only begun. It's time to quiet the mind and soothe the soul. Let these peaceful images and the promise of renewal carry you into a deep and restful sleep. Breathe in and out. Let's begin. The Slumber of Elara, a Psalm of Peace. Section 1 of 30. In a time beyond counting, in a valley cupped gently in the hands of the ancient, rolling hills, there lived a woman named Elara. Her home was a small cottage of honey-colored stone, with a roof of dark, fragrant thatch and a single window that looked out upon the world like a kind, wakeful eye. A creek, whose name was forgotten by all but the oldest stones in its bed, whispered secrets day and night as it curved around her garden. This was a place of deep and abiding peace, a peace that Elara tended to as carefully as she tended her rows of lavender and sage. Yet, as it does for all people in all times, a season of unrest found its way into Elara's heart. It did not arrive with a storm or a shout, but rather as a quiet, persistent whisper in the back of her mind, a faint trembling in her spirit that would not be still. The world beyond her valley was filled with clamor and haste, with worries that drifted on the wind like dust, and though she tried to shut them out, they began to settle upon her, a fine, gray film over the bright colors of her life. Her sleep, which had once been a deep, healing dive into a silent, star-kissed sea, became shallow and fitful. She would lie awake in her bed, listening to the familiar chorus of the crickets and the creek, but instead of a lullaby, they seemed to become a rhythm for her racing thoughts. The moon would trace its slow path across her windowpane, and she would follow it with wide, weary eyes, her mind a-loom weaving endless tapestries of what had been and what might yet be. The peace of the valley remained all around her, a tangible presence in the very air she breathed, but she could no longer feel it, no longer draw it inside to quiet the tremulous hum within her. It was as if she had become a separate note, slightly out of tune with the grand, harmonious song of her own home. And so, on this particular evening, as the sun began its slow, generous descent behind the western hills, painting the sky in strokes of violet and molten gold, Elara felt not anticipation for the restful night, but a dull dread for the long, wakeful hours that lay ahead. She stood at her door, her hand on the weathered wood, and looked out at the deepening shadows. The air was cool and sweet with the scent of damp earth and night-blooming flowers. It was, by every outward measure, a perfect evening, a gift of tranquility. But inside Elara, a storm of silence raged, a tempest of quiet anxiety that no one else could see. She knew she could not continue this way. Her body ached for true rest, her soul for the quiet assurance that had once been her constant companion. She took a deep, resolving breath, the kind that reaches for the very bottom of the lungs, and made a decision. She would not simply wait for sleep to claim her. She would go out into the gathering dusk, into the embrace of the valley she loved, and she would actively seek the peace that had eluded her. She would walk, and she would listen, and she would not return until her heart had once again learned the rhythm of the quiet earth. Section 2 of 30. Elara stepped out from the shelter of her cottage, and the twilight world received her like a long-lost daughter. The path before her, trod by her own feet and the delicate hooves of deer and foxes, was soft with fallen pine needles and moss. It led away from her garden, past the whispering creek, and into the deeper embrace of the woods that clothed the lower slopes of the hills. With each step, she made a conscious effort to release the tangled threads of her day, to let them fall away behind her like a shed cloak. She focused on the sensations around her, pulling her awareness away from the internal noise and into the external world. The air felt different now, cooler, as it slipped between the trees, carrying the complex perfume of the forest. The crisp, dry scent of old leaves, the sharp, clean aroma of pine resin, the rich, almost sweet odor of decaying wood returning to the earth. She walked slowly, her feet making almost no sound on the cushioned path. Above her, the canopy of oak and birch was a lacework of darkening green against a sky that was slowly deepening from a soft, bruised lavender to the velvety, profound blue that precedes true night. The first of the evening stars were there, pricking through the fabric of the sky, hesitant at first, then growing in confidence and number. They were not the bold, brilliant diamonds of deepest night, but softer, more distant sparks, like embers from a heavenly fire drifting slowly into view. Elara lifted her face to them, and for a moment, the simple, ancient act of stargazing stilled the chatter in her mind. She was not thinking of the vast, empty distances between them, nor of the science of their burning. Instead, she felt a strange kinship with their quiet, constant vigil. They were there night after night, unwavering in their appointed places, shining not with frantic energy, but with a patient, enduring light. A line from an old, half-remembered verse drifted into her mind, something her grandmother used to murmur at bedtime. It was a fragment, really, just a few words. "In peace I will lie down and sleep." The rest of it eluded her, hiding in the shadows of her memory. But those 6 words landed in her heart with a tangible weight. They felt like a promise or perhaps a secret key. She repeated them softly to herself, her voice a whisper lost in the rustle of leaves. "In peace I will lie down and sleep." Could it be that simple? Was it a state to be achieved? This peace, before sleep could truly come? She had been trying to chase sleep itself, to wrestle it into submission. But perhaps she had been approaching it from the wrong direction. Perhaps peace was the prerequisite, and sleep its natural, inevitable consequence. This thought became the new intention of her walk. She was no longer just seeking calm. She was seeking a specific, foundational peace, the kind that could cradle a weary soul into untroubled slumber. Her steps became a slow, mindful meditation, a physical prayer. With each footfall, she breathed in the cool night air, and with each exhalation, she imagined releasing another worry, another fear, another strand of the day's tension, letting the forest absorb them and transform them into silence. Section 3 of 30. The path now led Elara to the bank of the Whispering Creek. Here, the trees parted, opening a window to the sky, and the silver light of the rising moon spilled down, painting the world in monochrome and mystery. The water was a ribbon of moving darkness, flecked with captured starlight, and its sound was the dominant music of this part of the valley. During the day, it was a cheerful gurgle, a bright companion to the sun. But at night, its voice changed. It became lower, more resonant, a continuous, soothing murmur that seemed not to exist in the air, but in the very bones of the earth. Elara sat on a large, flat stone that had been warmed by the long-gone sun and was now cool and solid beneath her. She drew her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, making herself into a small, receptive vessel amidst the vastness of the night. She closed her eyes, not to shut out the world, but to experience it more fully through her other senses. She focused on the sound of the water. It was not a single sound, but a complex, layered symphony. There was the main current, a steady, low hum of purpose as the water flowed ever onward. Beneath that, there was the delicate plinking and plashing as tiny rivulets trickled over and around larger stones. And occasionally, there was the soft, hollow gurgle where the water eddied behind a submerged log, a sound like a contented sigh. Elara let this water music wash over her, not just her ears, but her entire being. She imagined it flowing through her, not as water, but as sound, a liquid melody that sought out the knotted, tense places in her spirit and began, slowly and gently, to smooth them away. The mantra returned, mingling with the sound of the creek. "In peace I will lie down and sleep." She pictured this peace not as an abstract concept, but as something as real and tangible as the water before her. It was a deep, still pool within her, a place of perfect quiet. The worries and anxieties were like leaves or twigs dropped onto the surface of this pool. They might float there for a time, but they could not disturb the profound stillness that lay in the depths below. The creek's endless journey was a lesson in letting go. It did not cling to any single droplet of water, nor to any particular stone. It simply moved, it flowed, it released, and in that constant, graceful release, it found its power and its song. Elara felt a corresponding release within herself. A worry about the morrow's chores arose, and she acknowledged it, pictured it as a leaf on her inner pool, and then watched as it slowly drifted away, carried on the current of her breath. A lingering tension from a conversation earlier in the day manifested as a tightness in her shoulders. She breathed into it, imagining the sound of the creek flowing into that tight space, softening it, until the tension dissolved like sugar in water. She was not fighting her unrest. She was simply creating a space of such profound and welcoming stillness that the unrest had no reason to remain. Section 4 of 30. As Elara sat in her silent communion with the creek and the stars, a new presence made itself known. It began as a subtle shift in the air, a gentle pressure that was felt rather than heard. The wind, which had been still for so long, began to stir. It started high in the pine trees that crowned the ridge above her, a soft, sighing breath that traveled down through the branches, a whisper passing from tree to tree. It was a slow, deliberate wind, not a chaotic gust, but a conscious, calming exhalation of the night itself. Soon, it reached Elara's position by the creek. It touched her face, a cool, gentle caress that dried the slight dampness of tears she hadn't realized she had shed. It played with the loose strands of her hair, a tender, almost maternal gesture. And then it moved into the leaves of the aspens and birches that lined the bank, and they began to speak. The sound of the wind through the leaves was one of the oldest sounds in the world. It was a hushed, rustling murmur, a language without words but full of meaning. It was the sound of comfort, the sound of a lullaby being sung by the earth itself. To Elara, it seemed to be answering the fragment of verse she carried in her heart. The creek provided the steady, grounding rhythm, and now the wind in the trees provided the melody. H. It seemed to say, all is well. H. You are safe. You are held. She opened her eyes and looked up. The moon, now higher in the sky, cast its light through the trembling leaves, creating a restless, shimmering pattern of light and shadow on the forest floor around her. It was a dance of silver and black, a silent, beautiful spectacle that had been performed every night for millennia. Elara felt a profound sense of her own smallness, not in a way that made her feel insignificant, but in a way that made her feel free. Her worries were so small in the face of this ancient, enduring rhythm. The trees had stood through countless storms and countless calm nights. The creek had never once ceased its flowing. The stars had never failed to appear. Her own life, with its fleeting troubles, was just a single note in this eternal, peaceful symphony. The feeling that arose in her now was not one she had to create or force. It was one she simply allowed to fill her, as the moonlight filled the clearing. It was a sense of trust, a deep, wordless knowing that she was a part of this great, slumbering world, and that she, too, could share in its rest. The phrase in her mind now felt complete, as if the wind and the trees and the water had whispered the rest of it to her. It was no longer just, in peace I will lie down and sleep, but a whole, completed thought. In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. She didn't analyze the theology of it. She felt the truth of it in her bones. The safety was not the absence of all danger, but the profound security of being a part of something vast, beautiful, and fundamentally good. It was the safety of the leaf trusting the branch, the stream trusting its bed, the star trusting its path. It was the safety that allowed for total surrender, for the deep, releasing sigh that precedes true sleep. Section 5 of 30. A great and gentle quietness settled over Elara, a quietness so deep and so complete that it seemed to be a presence in itself. The internal storm that had driven her from her cottage had passed, not with a dramatic finale, but by gently exhausting itself against the shores of this immense, surrounding peace. The humming anxiety was gone, replaced by a soft, resonant silence that echoed the silence of the stars and the deep, wordless slumber of the earth. She felt heavy, but it was a pleasant heaviness, the weight of a body finally, fully surrendering to gravity, ready to be supported and held by the solid ground. The cool night air no longer felt chilling, but like a clean, fresh sheet being drawn over her. The sounds of the forest, the creek's murmur, the wind's sigh, the occasional call of a distant owl were no longer separate noises to be listened to, but had woven themselves together into a single, seamless blanket of sound that wrapped around her, a protective cocoon of natural harmony. She knew it was time to return. The walk back to her cottage was different from the journey out. There was no seeking now, only a calm, unhurried return. Her footsteps were slow and measured, her body moving with a newfound grace, as if she were a part of the landscape drifting home. She did not need to clutch at the peace she had found. It flowed within her, as natural and constant as her own heartbeat. The path seemed shorter, friendlier, the moonlight illuminating her way like a benevolent guide. She reached her garden gate, its familiar creak a welcome sound in the stillness. She paused for a moment, looking back at the valley sleeping under the moon and stars. It was all there, just as it had been when she left. The whispering trees, the singing creek, the steadfast hills. Nothing had changed in the external world, and yet everything had changed within her. She had gone out feeling separate and at odds with the peace around her. She was returning feeling utterly intertwined with it, a single, resting note in the valley's silent night song. She entered her cottage, closing the door softly on the world outside. The interior was dark and quiet, filled with the familiar, comforting smells of dried herbs and beeswax. Moonlight streamed through the window, painting a silver rectangle on the wooden floor. She did not light a candle. The moonlight was enough. She moved to her bed, a simple frame piled high with downy blankets and a pillow stuffed with sweet-smelling hay. As she prepared to lie down, the completed verse rested in her mind, not as a thought, but as a lived experience, a truth witnessed in the fabric of the night. "In peace I will lie down and sleep," she whispered into the quiet room, her voice full of certainty. "For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." She lay down, her body sinking into the welcoming softness of the mattress. She pulled the blankets up to her chin, feeling their warm, familiar weight. She closed her eyes, and this time, there was no resistance. The images of the moonlit path, the murmuring creek, and the sighing trees floated gently behind her eyelids. She felt the safety of which the verse spoke. It was in the solidity of the earth beneath her cottage, in the enduring rhythm of the valley, in the watchful presence of the stars. She was dwelling in safety. She was held. And as this knowing settled into the very core of her being, her breathing slowed, deepening into the slow, regular rhythm of true sleep. The space between her thoughts grew wider and wider, until there were no thoughts at all, only a vast, dark, and wonderfully peaceful silence. Elara slept. Section 6 of 30. Elara's sleep was a journey, a slow, graceful descent into the very heart of the peace she had so actively sought in her moonlit wanderings. It was not a blank emptiness, not a void of nothingness, but a landscape vast and serene, rendered in the softest hues of feeling and the gentle, luminous light of a soul at rest. In her dreams, she did not travel to fantastical or strange lands filled with the stuff of myth and legend, but rather, she journeyed deeper, much deeper, into the essential, beating heart of her own beloved valley, a version of it distilled to its purest, most tranquil essence. She dreamed she was walking again, but her feet, which had earlier trod the soft, mossy path with a seeker's purpose, now did not touch the ground at all. She glided, a wisp of consciousness, a gentle breath of intention, carried effortlessly on the same tranquil breeze that stirred the highest, most delicate needles of the pine trees on the ridge. In this dream, the creek was not just water. It was a ribbon of liquid silver, a flowing vein of light coursing through the dark body of the land, and its constant, whispered secret was a language she could now, in this state of grace, perfectly understand. It spoke not in the clumsy, limited syllables of human speech, but in pure, pulsing waves of reassurance, a continuous, flowing mantra that echoed and amplified the one she had carried back to her cottage like a precious, found treasure. Safe, you are safe. All is well, all is always, and has always been, well. The trees, the great silent elders of the wood, seemed to bow slightly, reverently, as she passed, their leaves rustling a gentle, approving applause for her final, total surrender to the embracing arms of the night. Their roots, she could see with a dreamer's penetrating vision, did not just delve into dark soil. They plunged deep, deep into a bedrock of timeless, unshakable calm, and she felt a connection to that profound stability, as if silken, invisible threads of serenity were tethered from that deep, ancient stone to the very core of her own resting, trusting heart. Above, the stars were not distant, cold points of light. They were close, warm, soft lanterns hung in the velvet firmament by a benevolent hand, their light a tangible, warm presence that bathed her dream self in a soothing, celestial radiance. A light that did not illuminate to reveal, but to comfort, to bless, to hold. There was no sun in this dream, no harsh, demanding light of day, only this perpetual, comforting twilight, this soft, blue-hued sanctuary where shadows were not things to be feared or avoided, but soft, welcoming blankets of rest laid gently over the slumbering world. She felt herself expanding, not in physical size, but in the scope of her awareness, her consciousness softening at the edges, blending, merging, becoming one with the dreaming world that surrounded her. She was the patient, immense strength of the ancient hills that cradled the valley. She was the yielding, graceful flexibility of the willow that dipped its tender branches into the creek's cool waters. She was the quiet, enduring, patient glow of the star-flecked sky that watched over all. There was no longer a separate Elara and a separate valley. There was only a single, unified state of being, a collective, harmonious exhalation of the entire universe, a sigh of profound and perfect rest. In this state of beautiful unity, the very last, stubborn remnants of the day's tension, the forgotten worries that had buried themselves like tiny, sharp shards deep in the fibers of her muscles, finally, fully, completely unclenched. It was a physical sensation of melting, of dissolving, of returning to a liquid state of absolute trust, of being poured back into the great, calm ocean of being from which all life emerges. Her sleep became a deep, dark, healing well, and she was both the one who drew from it and the water itself. Each slow, tidal breath was a bucket lowering into the cool, silent, impossibly deep depths and rising up, brimming, overflowing with a quiet so potent, so pure. It was like a balm, a healing unction, to her every cell, to her very soul. Section 7 of 30. Outside the warm, dark cocoon of Elara's cottage, the living valley continued its ancient, nocturnal vigil, each element, each creature, each breath of wind playing its perfect, appointed part in the great, slow, symphonic movement of the night. A symphony now conducted by the full, benevolent, and silver-gilt gaze of the ascending moon. The creatures of the dark, the inheritors of this quiet kingdom, were going about their gentle, instinctual business, their lives a testament to a trust that required no thought, only being. A fox, its coat a brushstroke of russet and shadow, trotted silently, purposefully, along the edge of the wood where the trees gave way to the open meadow. Its paws, padded and soft, made no sound on the carpet of moss and last year's leaves. Its sharp, intelligent eyes reflected the moonlight like two small, still pools of liquid amber, seeing everything, judging nothing. It was not hunting with frantic urgency or desperate hunger, but moving with a quiet, purposeful, innate grace, a living part of the natural order that held no malice, no anxiety, only a pure and present necessity, a dance of life that was as serene as it was sure. High in the gnarled, sleeping branches of a great oak, an owl sat, a feathered sentinel, a statue of woven feathers and silence. Its round, forward-facing face was a disk of calm, unblinking observation, a receiver of the faintest starlight and the softest sounds. It did not feel the need to hoot its presence to the world. It simply sat, its stillness a profound testament to the watchful, encompassing patience of the night itself. It saw the fox pass below like a whisper of rust. It saw the silver, glistening trail of a snail on a rain-dampened stone. It saw the distant, square eye of the cottage window gone dark and blind with sleep, and it held all these things, the hunter, the slow traveler, the sleeping human, in its vast, silent, unblinking awareness. The world, in all its moonlit detail, was in its care, and it asked for nothing in return for this vigil. Down in the chuckling, whispering creek, the water skeeters, those tiny masters of surface tension, danced their weightless ballet on the skin of the water, their impossibly slender legs creating ever-widening, interlacing, concentric circles that caught the moonlight like a scattering of liquid mercury, like scattered coins from a sunken treasure. Beneath the surface, In the deeper, darker pools where the current slowed to a thoughtful pace, the trout held themselves steady, suspended in the liquid element, their gills pulsing with a slow, rhythmic, hypnotic regularity, their speckled backs perfectly still except for the slight, barely perceptible swaying of their fins, making tiny adjustments to remain in their chosen spot. They were sleeping in their own Piscean way, a state of alert, fluid rest, trusting the water absolutely to hold them, to bring them oxygen, to carry away their waste, to be their entire world. The air itself, the very medium through which sound and scent traveled, seemed to be sleeping, moving only in the slow, deep, resonant respirations of the night wind, a breath that took hours to complete, a cycle as long and slow as the turning of the seasons. It would stir the upper, sun-seeking branches of the pines, creating that long, sighing whisper. Then it would fall still for a long, contemplative while, as if the world itself was holding its breath in a sustained moment of perfect, poised peace, before slowly, gently, with infinite care, exhaling once more across the face of the land. This, the fox's grace, the owl's patience, the trout's trust, the wind's rhythmic breath. This was the safety of which the psalm spoke. It was not a fortress built against imagined dangers, not a sword and shield held against phantoms, but a seamless, effortless integration into a system that had, over countless millennia, perfected the sacred art of rest and renewal. It was the safety of the fox being exactly, perfectly what it was meant to be, of the owl seeing all it needed to see without fear or desire, of the trout trusting the element in which it lived and moved and had its being. And Elara, in her deep human slumber, was now just another beloved creature of this valley, her complex human worries shed like an outgrown skin, her spirit resting in the same elemental, wordless trust as the fox, the owl, and the trout. The valley held her, as it held them, without judgment, without condition, with an ancient, unwavering maternal constancy. Section 8 of 30. As the night deepened, weaving its dark threads ever more tightly, journeying toward that most silent, most profound hour that rests just before the first hint of dawn, a subtle, beautiful shift began to occur within the simple, stone-walled sanctuary of Elara's cottage. The peace that had entered with her, that she had gathered from the creek and the wind and the stars, was no longer just a feeling, a transient emotion in her own heart. It had become a palpable, living presence, an entity of calm, filling the small, dark room like a fragrant, invisible mist, like a gentle ghost of contentment. It settled on the simple, scarred wooden table, where a plain clay bowl of smooth, river stones sat, each one a testament to time and patience, worn to a state of perfect, oval smoothness by the ceaseless, gentle caress of the creek's waters over centuries. It rested heavily, sweetly on the worn, cushioned chair by the cold, dark fireplace, where a knitted blanket of undyed wool lay draped, its yarn loops holding the memory of warm, busy, daylight hands now stilled and folded in sleep. It hovered, a benevolent spirit, around the wooden shelves that held her glass jars of dried herbs, lavender for calm, its purple spikes now gray in the moonlight, but it sent a memory of summer peace. Chamomile for rest, its tiny, daisy-like flowers holding the sun's relaxation. Sage for cleansing, its sharp, clean aroma a promise of clarity. And this presence of peace seemed to awaken the dormant, sleeping essences within them, allowing their gentle, therapeutic scents to mingle and rise. Silent, aromatic prayer for continued, deepening tranquility. The moonlight, which had earlier painted a bright, sharp rectangle on the worn floorboards, had now begun its slow, inevitable, celestial creep across the room. Its journey a slow, silent clock marking the graceful, unhurried passage of this blessed, healing rest. It climbed, pixel by pixel of light, up the stout, carved leg of the oak table. It illuminated the curved, generous side of the clay water pitcher, making it gleam like a pale, fat moon itself, and finally, with a tenderness that seemed almost conscious, it came to rest its soft, silver radiance upon Elara's sleeping form. It lay first across her covered feet, then her legs, and finally her torso and her peaceful, upturned face, a soft, celestial blanket that seemed to seal her in this state of grace, anointing her with its cool, silent light. In the moonlight, her face, which in the waking world had been etched with the faint, but telling lines of daytime concern and responsibility, was now smooth and relaxed. The landscape of her features returned to a state of primordial peace. Her breathing was a model of perfect, unconscious rhythm, a slow and steady tide that spoke of a body and a mind in complete, harmonious accord, an instrument perfectly tuned. There was a slight, almost imperceptible, but utterly genuine smile gracing her lips, the kind that does not come from a happy thought or a remembered joke, but from a profound and wordless contentment that springs from the soul's deepest well, a smile that the soul itself makes when it knows, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that it is home, that it is safe, that it is loved. Inside her, the miraculous, hidden healing work of sleep continued its silent, efficient labor. Her heart beat a slow, strong, steady, and reassuring rhythm, a drum in the dark, pumping not just oxygen-rich blood, but this newfound, hard-won peace to every farthest, most forgotten cell in her body. Her muscles, which had been taut strings ready to play a song of tension, were now loose, heavy, and pliant, receiving a deep, internal massage from the inside out, each fiber unkinking, each knot dissolving into the general softness of rest. Her mind, that busy, relentless loom of the day, was at total, absolute rest, the shuttles still and silent, the threads of thought and memory and anticipation lying slack, and used at peace. In the place where dreams were woven, there was now only a soft, dark, velvety space, a nourishing void, a fertile fallow field where the spirit could simply be, without having to do or think or plan or become. This void, this quiet, was not emptiness. It was fullness of a different kind, the fullness of potential, of restoration, of pure being. This was the true, the deepest meaning of lying down in peace. It was a total, voluntary capitulation to the present moment, a conscious disarmament of the will, a trust so profound, so complete, that it allowed the very essence of the self to be unmade, remade, and restored in the quiet, holy workshop of the night. Section 9 of 30. And so, the verse, that simple, yet infinitely powerful promise from an ancient text, had found its living, breathing, sleeping embodiment in the small stone cottage nestled in the protective embrace of the valley. I will lie down and sleep in peace, the psalmist had declared across the centuries, a voice crying out in the human wilderness of fear and unrest. And now, in this time, in this place, Elara was the living, breathing proof of its possibility, its tangible truth. The verse was not a magical incantation, not a spell that could banish all of life's very real troubles and pains with a mere utterance. It was, rather, a declaration of a state of being, a conscious, willful choice to align one's own inner, turbulent reality with a greater, divine, and unchanging truth that underpins all of creation. For Elara, that truth had been revealed to her not in a stone temple built by human hands, not from the pages of a book alone, but under the vast, open cathedral of the sky, in the humble, profound classroom of the natural world. The Lord, the source of all being, the great I Am, the ground of all existence, made her dwell in safety. This safety was the solid, reliable creek bed that held the wandering water. It was the silent, immense law of gravity that held the earth in its faithful orbit around the life-giving sun. It was the innate, flawless intelligence that guided the fox on its silent hunt and the owl on its patient perch. It was the mysterious, beautiful, and perfect process of cellular repair and regeneration that was happening within her own body as she slept, a process she did not will, but could only receive. Through the act of surrender, it was the fundamental, unassailable benevolence woven into the very fabric of existence, a golden thread in the tapestry of life, often hidden from the frantic daytime eye, but clearly visible in the calm, perceptive heart of the night. To dwell in this safety was to recognize, to feel in one's very bones, that one is an inseparable, cherished part of this benevolent whole system, to trust the process of life and the necessity of rest as implicitly, as innocently, as the seed trusts the dark, welcoming soil and the gentle, life-giving rain, knowing with a certainty that bypasses the intellect that its own nature, its own destiny, is to sprout, to grow, to reach for the light. As Elara slept on, journeying through the deepest cycles of her rest, the first, almost imperceptible hint of a future change touched the eastern edge of the sky, far beyond the rim of her valley. It was not light, not yet, not even the faintest gray smear of dawn. It was a slight, subtle lessening of the absolute, ink-black blackness, a sense that the immense, dark, star-dusted bowl of the night was being ever so gently, infinitesimally, lifted from its outermost edge. The most sensitive of the morning creatures, those attuned to the most delicate shifts in the world's energy, began to stir in their secret nests and burrows. A lone bird, still hidden and invisible in the deep, protective depths of a hawthorn bush, its feathers fluffed against the night's coolness, let out a single soft, experimental chirp, a liquid, questioning note that was uttered and then absorbed instantly, completely, by the thick, waiting silence. It was not a song, not yet, but a promise of the dawn to come, a tiny, feathered scout sent out to test the boundaries of the night. It was not its arrival. There was still a long, deep, precious, and expansive stretch of night remaining, a sanctuary of darkness made specifically for rest, for dreams, for the soul's repair, and this sanctuary was guarded fiercely by the retreating moon. The moon, acknowledging this subtle, distant shift, seemed to soften its brilliant, silver glow, its light becoming more maternal, more protective, more tender, as if it were consciously gathering the last, deepest hours of darkness around the slumbering world, tucking them in like a soft, heavy blanket around a sleeping child, determined to preserve the peace for just a little while longer. In her cottage, deep in the arms of the valley, Elara sensed none of this impending change. She was journeying now in the deepest, most remote realms of sleep, the slow wave, delta wave sleep where the body does its most profound restoration and the spirit communes most directly with the silent, boundless source of all things. She was perfectly, utterly, and completely at peace, a still, serene point in the slowly turning world, living out the truth of the psalm in every breath, in every beat of her heart, in every resting fiber of her being. Section 10 of 30. Let us linger here, now, in this hushed and holy space, on the threshold of this deep, collective rest, and allow the feeling of Elara's hard-won peace to expand, to radiate outward, to become a soft, warm, invisible blanket that covers not just her, but all who hear her story, all who share in this moment of quiet listening. Imagine this peace, not as an abstract idea, but as a real, tangible energy, a soft, gray-silver light, beginning as a small, bright ember in the center of her quiet, moonlit cottage, in the very center of her own sleeping chest. And then picture this light, this feeling slowly, gently beginning to spread. It grows, it pulses with the rhythm of her slow breath, and it begins to seep, soundlessly, through the solid stone walls of her home, not disturbing them, not breaking them, but becoming one with the very molecules of the night air, permeating the atmosphere with its calming frequency. It flows, like an invisible, benevolent fog, down the dewy garden path, blessing the sleeping lavender, whose scent is the very aroma of tranquility, and the closed, dreaming faces of the evening primroses, which hold the memory of yesterday's sun. It mingles like a spirit with the cool, dark waters of the whispering creek, enhancing its ancient lullaby, adding a new depth of calm to its eternal murmur, and it rises, light as a prayer, up into the waiting, receptive branches of the oaks and the pines and the whispering aspens, deepening the already soothing sigh of the night wind, turning it into a veritable symphony of solace. This peace, born of a single woman's surrender, knows no boundaries of stone or space. It travels on the wings of intention and story, over the dark, sleeping hills that cradle the valley, and it spills out, generously, into the wider world that lies beyond this peaceful haven. It drifts, a silent blessing, on the air currents over bustling, lit-up towns where other souls lie awake in their beds, their minds racing with lists and worries and regrets, and it whispers to them, softly, persistently, of a quiet creek somewhere, of a steadfast moon, of a path that leads to rest. It floats, gentle as thistledown, through the slightly open windows of high-city apartments, where the artificial blue light of screens paints tired faces, and it offers them the memory, the feeling, of a darkness that is not empty or lonely, but full, rich, and comforting, a darkness that is a friend to the weary. This is the gift of Elara's story. It is not hers alone. The peace she found after her seeking is not a limited resource, not a prize that she won and now hoards. It is a universal truth, a deep, still, ever-full pool that exists within the heart of every person, beneath the layers of stress and noise, waiting, always waiting, to be remembered, to be discovered. Sometimes it takes a long, lonely walk in the moonlight to remember it. Sometimes it takes the sound of steady rain on a rooftop, or the feeling of a soft, cool pillow against a warm cheek, or the simple, focused rhythm of our own breath, in and out, in and out. And sometimes it takes a story, a gentle, meandering narrative that paints a picture with words of surrender and trust, to guide us, to lead us by the hand, back to that quiet, sacred place within ourselves. So now, as you listen, as you let the words wash over you, you too are invited into the valley. You are there. You are sitting on the smooth, cool, solid surface of the flat stone by the creek, feeling its unshakable support beneath you. You are hearing the water's endless, soothing, repetitive murmur, a sound that has echoed since the world was young. You are feeling the gentle, caressing touch of the night wind on your face, a touch that soothes and cools. You are looking up, through the lacework of leaves, at the same patient, watchful, and benevolent stars that watched over Elara. And the same verse, the same ancient, powerful promise, is being whispered now into the quiet, listening sanctuary of your own heart. A promise as real and as available for you in this moment as it was for Elara in her cottage, and for the psalmist who first, in a moment of his own need, wrote it down thousands of years ago. In peace I will lie down and sleep. You can say, you can feel with a growing, deepening certainty. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. The day is over. Its duties are complete. Its demands have fallen silent. Its worries, its struggles, its joys and its sorrows can all be released now, like leaves dropped onto the surface of a still, deep pool, where they will gently float away. You have arrived, fully, at this moment, this sanctuary of the night. There is nothing more to do. There is nowhere else you need to be. You are here now in this place of rest, and you are safe. You are held. Allow your body to feel heavy, to feel dense, to be fully, completely supported by the surface beneath you, whether it is a soft mattress or a comfort. Section 11 of 30. And so, within the gentle, unbreakable hold of this divinely appointed safety, Elara's slumber deepened, becoming a vast and silent ocean of rest, a sea of tranquility where the final, faint echoes of her waking self dissolved into the boundless, quiet dark. Her consciousness, no longer tethered to the linear, ticking clock of the day, drifted in the timeless currents of the deep night, a leaf carried on a slow, meandering river that flowed through the very heart of peace itself. In this state, there was no memory of the unrest that had driven her from her cottage, for that felt like a story belonging to another person, in another lifetime, a faint and fading dream within this greater, more real dream of serenity. Her body, that faithful, weary vessel that had carried her through the day's labors and the evening's seeking, was now being remade from the inside out, cell by cell, fiber by fiber, in the hidden alchemical workshop of sleep. Every breath she drew was a slow, tidal rhythm, a wave of life that washed through her, scouring away the microscopic residues of the day's fatigue, leaving behind only the clean, polished stillness of a shore after the tide has receded. Her heartbeat was a soft, steady, distant drum, a muffled signal from a faraway land, its rhythm syncing with the pulse of the earth itself, a foundational beat that underpinned the silence rather than breaking it. In this profound depth of rest, even her dreams changed their quality. They were no longer narratives with characters and events, but pure sensations, landscapes of feeling. She dreamed the feeling of cool, dark soil. She dreamed the sensation of deep roots drinking slowly from hidden, underground streams. She dreamed the weightlessness of a dandelion seed caught on a warm updraft, spinning lazily in a sunbeam, though there was no sun, only the feeling of effortless floating. She was, in these dreams, elemental. She was mineral, vegetable, and atmospheric, all at once, a participant in the silent, slow, majestic dance of the cosmos, a dance where the only steps were acceptance, trust, and rest. This was the fulfillment of the promise, the lived reality of lying down in peace. It was not merely the absence of noise, but the presence of a profound, active, and healing quiet, a silence that was itself a form of music, composed for a single receptive soul by the maestro of the universe. And in this music, there was no discord, no strain, only the perfect, harmonious chord of a creature at rest within its creator's care. A note held, sustained, and beautiful beyond measure. Section 12 of 30. Meanwhile, the world outside her window, the great, living, breathing tapestry of the night, continued its own silent, purposeful, and majestic work, each element a vital, shimmering thread in the divine weaving of this universal peace, a peace that wrapped itself around the spinning globe like a soft, protective blanket. The moon, that ancient, silver sentinel, having reached its zenith and poured its fullest, most brilliant light upon the world, now began its own slow, graceful, and unhurried descent toward the soft, dark shoulders of the western hills, its light shifting subtly, almost imperceptibly, from a brilliant, commanding, almost stark silver to a softer, more melancholic, more compassionate mother-of-pearl luminescence, as if it were pouring the last and most potent of its soothing, healing energies into the slumbering world before its departure, a final blessing for the deepest hours of the night. The shadows it cast grew longer, deeper, and infinitely softer, their edges blurring and melting into the general darkness, as if the night itself were exhaling a final, contented, and utterly relaxed sigh, allowing the darkness to become more absolute, more embracing, more comforting in the valleys and hollows, in the forests and the sleeping villages, a darkness that was not an absence, but a presence, a friend to the weary. The great chorus of the night insects, which had risen to a vibrant, pulsating, electric hum at the height of the darkness, now began to slow their collective rhythm, their chirping and fiddling and thrumming becoming more spaced, more deliberate, more thoughtful, each individual note hanging in the cool, still air a little longer before being answered by another from across the meadow or deep within the woods, creating a slower, more spacious, and even more hypnotic rhythm, a lullaby that was, gradually, gently winding down, easing the world, note by note, breath by breath, toward the deepest, most silent point of its rest, high up on the rocky, wind-scoured outcrops, where the granite shoulders of the ancient hills broke through the thin, starved soil. The lingering, stored warmth of the daytime sun was finally, fully released, a last, generous gift of heat radiating out into the vast, cold, silent expanse of space. And the stones themselves, feeling this release, settled into the profound, essential coolness of the night, their great stony, patient hearts beating with a slowness that made geological ages seem swift, their stability and unspoken promise of permanence in a changing world. Down in the meadow, the tall, graceful grasses, heavy now with a king's ransom of dew, bowed their heads under the weight of 1,000 tiny, liquid pearls, each one a perfect, self-contained, miniature world reflecting the fading moon and the few remaining, steadfast stars, a myriad of tiny, silver mirrors showing the sky its own sleeping face. This dew was the night's tender mercy, a blanket of pure, life-giving moisture laid down to cool and nourish the thirsty earth. And as it formed, it did so in utter silence, a secret, sacred agreement between the cooling air and the receptive, open blades of grass, a miracle so common it was forgotten, yet so essential it sustained all life. Nothing in this entire, vast, nocturnal panorama was rushed. Nothing was anxious. Nothing strove or struggled. Every process, from the moon's majestic journey across the arc of the sky to the formation of a single perfect dewdrop on a single blade of grass, operated on a timescale of perfect, patient, boundless grace. The universe was not ticking toward a deadline. It was resting, luxuriating, in a moment that was eternal, a perpetual, peaceful, and glorious now. And Elara, in her humble cottage, was the blessed, peaceful beneficiary of this entire cosmic, patient system. The slowing, spacing insect song was her personal, ever-changing lullaby. The softening, compassionate moonlight was her gentle, celestial night light. The radiant, releasing coolness of the ancient stones was her deep, subconscious assurance that the world was stable, firm, and utterly dependable beneath her. She was not a separate, isolated observer of this great resting system. She was an integral, cherished part of it, her human sleep a conscious, willing, and joyful participation in the world's own sacred nocturnal Sabbath, a holy day of rest that renewed not just her, but all of creation. Section 13 of 30. Inside the cottage, the atmosphere of peace had now become so thick, so rich, so tangible. It was almost a substance one could breathe, a velvet darkness infused with the very essence of security, a liquid tranquility in which the entire room was submerged. The small, familiar, beloved objects in the room seemed to have shed their mundane, daytime functions and now existed simply as anchors, as icons of tranquility. Their forms and purposes simplified, purified, into pure, calming, benevolent presence. The wooden table was no longer merely a surface for preparing food or mending tools or laying out the day's plans. It was a block of steadfastness, an altar of stability, its solid, stout legs rooted to the floor as surely as an oak tree is rooted to the earth, its flat, smooth top a plane of perfect, unwavering stability in a spinning world, a place where chaos could not land. The clay pitcher of water, sitting in the faint moonlight, was no longer just a vessel for drink. It was a still, small well of silence, a humble container of the profound, holding in its cool, dark, rounded interior a miniature of the deep, hidden, underground aquifers that fed the valley's springs, a quiet, constant reminder of the hidden, sustaining, ever-fresh sources that never run dry, that are always there, waiting to quench a deeper thirst than that of the body alone. The knitted blanket draped over the chair was not merely for warmth. It was a tapestry of comfort, a woven story of care, each loop of soft, undyed yarn a stitch of love, a physical manifestation, a sacrament of the feeling of being swaddled, protected, and held in the arms of something infinitely kind and strong. Even the dust motes, which in the daytime would dance and sparkle in the intrusive sunbeams, were now settled, asleep on the silent surfaces, adding their minute peaceful weight to the general, overwhelming feeling of a world utterly at rest, of all frantic motion ceased, of all hurry finally, completely and blessedly gone. The air in the room was perfectly, profoundly still, yet it felt alive, charged not with kinetic energy, but with a potent, healing absence of it, a negative capability, a fertile void that allowed for the deepest, most essential repair of the spirit. It was in this hushed, holy sanctuary that Elara's body completed its sacred journey into the most restorative, mysterious phases of sleep. Her core temperature dropped slightly, a physiological echo, a sympathetic resonance with the cooling night outside, her body wisely conserving its precious energy for the vital, internal work of healing that could only happen in this state of surrender. Her muscles, now completely flaccid, heavy and pliant, like well-kneaded dough, were being flushed with cleansing blood and restorative hormones that repaired microscopic tears, soothed invisible inflammation, and washed away the metabolic debris, the psychic ashes, of the previous day's exertions and emotions. Her brain, that magnificent, complex, overworked organ, was busy at work too, not with thoughts or worries or plans, but with the silent logistics of the soul. Consolidating memories, filing away experiences, sorting the important from the trivial and strengthening, reinforcing, the neural pathways associated with the peace and safety she had so profoundly felt by the creek, making that feeling a more permanent, accessible state of her being. It was as if her very mind was being reorganized, its cluttered rooms swept clean, its scattered papers neatly filed, its windows thrown open to let in the fresh, clean air of the night, all by the silent, efficient, knowing hands of the restorative darkness. In this state, the line between the physical and the spiritual blurred, dissolved, became meaningless. The peace that filled the room was not just a metaphor or a feeling. It was a real, physiological, measurable force, lowering her cortisol levels, slowing her respiratory rate to a meditative crawl, and guiding her entire nervous system from the alert, frantic, sympathetic state of fight or flight into the deep, healing, restorative, parasympathetic state of rest and digest, of be and renew. She was dwelling in safety, and every cell in her body knew it, believed it, felt it in its very core, and was thriving, glowing, regenerating because of it. This was the miracle of the verse, made manifest not in theory, but in flesh and blood and bone and sinew, a living testament to the power of sacred rest. Section 14 of 30. Let us now, for a moment, expand our view, widen our lens, to contemplate the truly cosmic, the infinite scope of this peace, For the safety in which Elara so blissfully dwelt was not a local phenomenon, not a fluke of geography or a lucky chance, but a fundamental, unshakable law of a lovingly, intelligently, and benevolently ordered universe, a universe whose very fabric was woven with threads of grace. The moon that watched over her quiet valley, painting her cottage in silver and casting long, soft shadows through the pine trees, was the very same moon that pulled the great, breathing tides and distant, slumbering oceans on the other side of the world, its gravitational embrace a gentle, consistent, invisible force that spoke of intimate connection across vast, empty, stellar spaces, a force that bound the liquid heart of the planet to a lifeless rock in the sky in a dance of perfect balance. The stars that pricked the velvet sky above her roof, arranged in their ancient, familiar constellations, were not mere pinpricks of cold light, but distant, roaring suns, each one a colossal furnace of energy, the center of its own vast, swirling system, many likely circled by worlds of their own, oceans of their own, valleys of their own, all held in the same delicate, dynamic, breathtaking balance, all obeying the same silent, elegant, physical laws of motion and gravity that held Elara securely in her bed. In the immense, cold, apparently empty void between these stars, there was no chaos, no randomness, but a profound, majestic, and intricate order, a dance of spheres on a scale so vast it dwarfed all human comprehension, a ballet whose music was the silent, expanding breath of creation itself. And yet, and this is the crucial, the beautiful, the soul-comforting truth, this cosmic order, this immense clockwork precision governing billions of galaxies, was not a cold, mechanical, uncaring thing. It was the visible, tangible expression, the outward and visible sign of the same divine care, the same foundational love that provided a soft bed for a weary woman in a stone cottage, that guided a fox on its silent hunt, that taught a bird to sing at dawn. The same fundamental force that kept the planets in their faithful, unwavering orbits also held Elara's sleeping body securely in its rest, preventing it from floating away, grounding it in the reality of safety. The same beautiful, elegant mathematics that described the spiral of a distant galaxy, the Fibonacci sequence in a sunflower, also governed the perfect, branching, life-giving pattern of the veins in her resting hands, the rhythm of her heart, the firing of her neurons. She was, in the most literal and awe-inspiring sense, a microcosm of the macrocosm, a small, breathing, dreaming echo of the great, silent, magnificent universe itself. And just as the universe, in all its immensity and power, did not hurtle toward dissolution and chaos but rested in the steady, expanding, purposeful breath of ongoing creation, so too could Elara. So too can we rest in the absolute certainty that we are each held, cherished, and sustained within that same creative, loving, sustaining breath. The worries of mortgage payments and social obligations, of past regrets and future anxieties, were not just personally insignificant in this cosmic light. They were cosmically insignificant. They were like tiny, transient, fleeting eddies on the surface of a mighty river that flowed with the power and purpose of continents. A river that would carry them away and smooth them out without a second thought. To lie down in peace, true, soul-deep peace, was to recognize this profound truth, to release the arrogant, exhausting, and ultimately futile notion that one's own will and worry were the central, driving forces of the universe, and to instead surrender, to yield, to let go, into the far greater, more competent, infinitely more powerful, and infinitely more peaceful flow of divine grace. This was the ultimate, the only real safety. The safety of being a beloved, intended, and integral part of a creation that was, at its very core, fundamentally, overwhelmingly, and eternally good. It was a safety that could not be earned, only accepted, could not be built, only received. It could be felt not by striving, but by yielding, not by grasping, but by opening the hands and the heart in the darkness, and trusting that you will be held. Section 15 of 30. And so, as the night reached its absolute, still and silent core, the hour known only to the wise old owls, the secretive badgers, and the most deeply, trustfully sleeping humans, a final, seamless, and glorious unity was achieved. A unity that was the fulfillment of all seeking and the answer to all longing. Elara was not in the valley. The valley, in its entirety, was in Elara. The steady, endless, reassuring rhythm of the creek was the very rhythm of her blood. flowing through her veins with a liquid, peaceful constancy. The patient, immense, unshakable strength of the ancient, sleeping hills was the strength of her bones, the solid framework that supported her being. The soft, resilient, life-sustaining moss that grew on the north side of the trees was the tenderness of her skin, the sensitive, receiving surface where she met the world. The vast, star-filled, mysterious sky, with its depths and its silences, was the boundless expanse of her dreaming mind, a universe of potential and peace contained within the vessel of her own consciousness. There was no longer any distinction, any separation, between the seeker and what she had sought, the sleeper and the world in which she slept. She had become the living, breathing embodiment of the psalm, a walking, dreaming testament to the fact that the promise of peaceful sleep was not a conditional offer for the perfect or the pious, but an eternal, always available, ever-present state of grace for any soul who would simply release their desperate, white-knuckled grip on the day and fall backward, in trust, into the foundational, everlasting safety of the night. In this sacred unity, there was no further need for dreams, for sensations, or even for thought. There was only being, a pure, unadulterated, luminous, and peaceful existence. The candle of her conscious awareness, which had burned with a bright, sometimes flickering, sometimes anxious flame throughout the demanding hours of the day, was now not extinguished, but lovingly sheltered, its flame protected from the winds of worry, allowed to burn with a low, steady, calm, and enduring glow that would be her source of light, her source of warmth, her source of courage and clarity for the day to come. She had journeyed, through trust and surrender, to the very center of rest, to the very heart of the divine alone that made her dwell in safety. And there, in that holy of holies, she found not emptiness, not absence, but a fullness that surpassed all human understanding, a connection that transcended all separation. It was a fullness of silence, a richness of darkness, a boundless wealth of peace. And in this profound, unified, and holy state, the night held her, the universe approved, the stars sang a silent hymn of accompaniment, and the ancient promise, made so long ago to a troubled heart not so different from her own, was kept, was fulfilled, was made real once again, in the quiet, trusting, and peaceful heart of a woman named Elara, who had chosen, simply and courageously, to believe, to lie down, and to sleep. Section 16 of 30. Within this state of sublime unity, a profound and gentle knowing began to permeate Elara's being, a knowledge that bypassed the busy pathways of the brain and was absorbed directly by the soul, as the earth absorbs the gentle, soaking rain. This knowing was the understanding that the peace she experienced was not a temporary respite, a fleeting vacation from her cares, but rather her true and fundamental state of being, the ground of her existence from which she had only temporarily wandered during the distracting, dazzling hours of the day. The anxieties and worries that had felt so large, so solid, so immovable, were now revealed to be what they had always been. Wisps of mist, illusions cast by a mind that had forgotten its own inherent connection to the source of all calm. They had no substance, no permanence, no power to truly harm the eternal, quiet self that resided at her core, the self that was now, in sleep, remembering its own nature. This remembering was not an intellectual process, but a cellular one, a feeling of homecoming so deep and so right that it elicited a sigh from her sleeping form, a long, slow, releasing breath that carried away the very last vestiges of resistance. Her body, now fully aligned with this truth, seemed to sink even deeper into the mattress, as if the bed itself were softening, becoming less a piece of furniture and more a cloud, a supportive, formless embrace that conformed perfectly to her shape, holding her without pressure, without demand. The weight of her limbs was no longer a burden, but a gift, a delightful sensation of surrender to the benevolent pull of the earth, a feeling of being gratefully, willingly, and completely grounded. In this space, time itself lost all meaning. The concept of minutes and hours, of a night having a beginning, a middle, and an end, dissolved into irrelevance. There was only this eternal, ongoing, ever-deepening now, a present moment that stretched infinitely in all directions, a perpetual sanctuary of rest that had always been available and would always remain. She was not passing through the night. She was residing within the heart of night itself, and the heart of night was peace, was safety, was home. And in this home, There were no doors to lock, no threats to guard against. For the safety was not something provided from the outside, but something emanating from the inside out. A light that shone from her own peaceful core, illuminating the darkness from within, proving that the darkness itself was not something to be feared, but a friend, a companion, a fertile ground for the soul's renewal. Section 17 of 30. The world outside, in harmony with Elara's inner state, continued its descent into the profoundest quiet of the pre-dawn hours. The wind, which had been a soft, intermittent sigh, now fell completely still, as if the very air were holding its breath in reverence for the sacred work of deep sleep happening in a million beds, in 1,000 forests, across the sprawling, silent landscape. The trees stood in absolute, motionless vigil, their leaves utterly still, their branches etched like dark, intricate lace against the slightly paler canvas of the sky. Not a twig snapped, not a leaf quivered. This was not the stillness of death, but the vibrant, potent stillness of maximum potential. The pause at the bottom of a breath before the exhalation. The quiet at the center of a spinning galaxy. The creek's voice, now the dominant sound in the universe, seemed to change its tone once more. Its continuous murmur became lower, softer, more resonant, as if it were no longer flowing over stones, but through a deep subterranean cavern. It sounded a deep, cello-like hum that was felt more in the bones than heard with the ears. It was the sound of the earth's own slow, steady heartbeat, a primordial rhythm that predated all life and would continue long after. The creatures that had been active were now all at rest. The fox was curled in its den, its brush tucked over its nose. The owl had closed its great, round eyes, becoming just another knot on the old oak's limb. The water skeeters had ended their dance, finding stillness on the water's skin. Even the microbes in the soil seemed to slow their frantic division, participating in the world's collective Sabbath. This was the great silence, the time when the world was closest to its essence, stripped of action, stripped of noise, reduced to its pure being state. And in the midst of this great silence, Elara's cottage was a focal point, a nucleus of peace. The stones of its walls, cooled now to the same temperature as the night air, seemed to breathe in unison with the sleeping woman inside, their long, slow exhalation of stored sunlight complete, their presence now simply one of solid, reliable, silent witness. The thatched roof, a complex ecosystem of its own, was a haven for countless tiny, sleeping insects and spiders, all part of the great, interwoven web of life that was, for these hours, utterly at rest. The entire valley was a single, slumbering entity, and Elara's peaceful breath was its breath, her quiet heart its heart, her surrendered soul its soul. The promise of the psalm was not just for one woman, but for the whole world, whenever it chose to lie down, to be still, and to remember what it truly was. Section 18 of 30. Inside the cottage, the quality of the darkness itself began to transform. It was no longer merely an absence of light, but a positive presence, a soft, heavy, velvet cloak that laid itself over everything, absorbing sound, slowing thought, encouraging a depth of rest that was otherwise impossible. This was the darkness of the womb, rich with potential and utterly safe, a darkness that nourished and protected the nascent forms of dreams and the delicate process of healing. The sliver of moonlight that had earlier crossed the room had now traveled its course and vanished, leaving the interior in a pure, unadulterated gloom that was comforting, not frightening. It was a darkness that asked nothing of the eyes, that allowed them to rest completely in their sockets, unstimulated, at peace. In this profound dark, Elara's other senses, already muted by sleep, also retreated, turning inward completely. She was not aware of the scent of the herbs anymore, or the feel of the blanket, or the distant sound of the creek. Her entire being was focused on the internal, invisible work of restoration. On a physiological level, her body was producing a symphony of healing chemicals. Growth hormone, the master restorer, coursed through her bloodstream, repairing tissues, building bone, and rejuvenating organs. Her immune system was particularly active, its vigilant cells patrolling her body, seeking out and dismantling potential threats, a silent, efficient army defending the peaceful kingdom of herself. Her brain was awash with cerebrospinal fluid, which pulsed in rhythm with her slow heartbeat, washing through the intricate folds of her brain, flushing away the metabolic waste products that had accumulated during the day's thinking. A nightly, purifying tide that left her mind clean, clear, and ready for the new day. This was the miracle of sleep made manifest in biology. The divine promise of safety and peace translated into the language of hormones and neural pathways. It was a testament to the fact that the body, when given the correct conditions of trust and surrender, knows exactly how to heal itself, how to return to its natural state of balance and wholeness. Elara was not doing any of this. She was simply allowing it. She had provided the permission, through her act of lying down in peace, and the ancient, intelligent wisdom of her own body, in harmony with the universe, was doing the rest. Her sleep was an act of co-creation with the divine, a partnership in which her role was to trust, and the role of life itself was to restore, to renew, to make all things new again in the quiet workshop of the night. Section 19 of 30. As this deepest phase of the night held the world in its soft, powerful grip, the texture of Elara's dreams shifted once more, evolving from pure sensation into a state of wordless communion. She dreamed she was in a great, silent library, but the shelves were not filled with books. Instead, they held objects of deep, personal significance. A smooth stone from the creek, a feather from a blue jay, the cracked clay cup from her kitchen shelf, and each object, as she focused her dream gaze upon it, did not tell a story, but radiated a feeling, a pure, distilled emotion. The stone radiated steadfastness. The feather radiated freedom. The cup radiated humble usefulness. And she understood, without words, that these were the true chapters of her life, not a sequential narrative of events, but a collection of essential qualities that she had gathered, that she was. She was not reading her story. She was feeling her essence. Then, the dream library melted away, and she was floating in a space of pure, golden silence. It was a silence that was not empty, but full of presence, a listening, loving attention that surrounded her completely. In this silence, she felt known. Not known for her accomplishments or her failures, not known for her personality or her history, but known in her essence, in her simple, fundamental beingness, as a parent knows a child in the womb. It was a knowing that required no words, that held no judgment, that offered only unconditional acceptance. This was the you in the psalm, the you alone, O Lord. It was not a distant, fearsome deity, but this very presence, this intimate, loving attention that filled the silence and filled her. To dwell in safety was to dwell in this knowing, to rest in this unconditional acceptance. It was the ultimate security, the safety of being fully seen and fully loved, exactly as one is, without the need to perform, to achieve, or to become anything other than what one already was in this moment. A beloved creature, sleeping, breathing, and held in an infinite gentle gaze. A deep, profound joy arose from within her, a joy that had no cause and needed no object, a joy that was simply the natural effervescence of a soul that feels itself perfectly safe, perfectly loved, perfectly at home. It was a joy that expressed itself not in laughter, but in an even deeper, more serene relaxation, a final, total letting go into the arms of the infinite. Section 20 of 30. And so, at the very nadir of the night, a perfect equilibrium was achieved. The forces of activity and rest, of light and dark, of sound and silence, were in perfect, poised balance. It was the still point of the turning world, a moment of sublime, suspended animation where everything was complete, whole, and at peace. Elara, the valley, the cosmos, all were one harmonious entity, breathing in unison with the slow, deep breath of God. In this state, the last concept of a separate self gently dissolved. She was not a woman named Elara sleeping in a cottage. She was the sleeping itself. She was the peace that permeated the darkness. She was the safety that cradled the world. She was the silent affirmation of the psalm, made flesh, made spirit, made real. The journey was over because there was no longer any distance to travel. The seeking was complete because she had become what she sought. She had fully inhabited the promise, and the promise had fully inhabited her. There was no difference. The night held her not as a separate thing, but as its own self. The universe recognized itself in her peaceful form. And in this recognition, there was a contentment so deep, so vast, that it could never be disturbed by the fleeting troubles of a day, for it was rooted in the eternal, unchanging reality of love and safety. Here, in the heart of the night, in the heart of the psalm, in the heart of her own being, Elara had found her true home, and she rested there, forever and always, in a peace that truly did pass all understanding. Section 21 of 30. As the perfect equilibrium of the night's deepest hour held the world in its serene and boundless embrace, a subtle, gentle, and infinitely tender shift began to stir at the edges of the cosmos, not as an intrusion, but as the next natural, graceful movement in the great, slow dance of time. This was not the harsh, demanding call of the dawn, but its first, soft, prenatal whisper, a vibration of change so delicate that only the most attuned elements of the world could perceive it. Far to the east, beyond the sleeping hills that cradled the valley, beyond the dark, silent forests and the slumbering towns, the impenetrable blackness of the sky began to undergo a transformation so gradual it was imperceptible to any waking eye. It was as if a single, microscopic drop of the purest, palest gray ink had been released into a vast bowl of black water, its influence spreading with infinite patience, softening the absolute edge of the darkness without yet providing any light. This was the first, tentative loosening of the night's grip, a promise made in a whisper, a secret shared between the turning earth and the retreating stars. High above, the constellations, those ancient, glittering beasts and heroes, seemed to sense this subtle change. Their brilliant, diamond-hard sparkle began to soften, their light becoming more diffuse, as if they were slowly turning from polished gemstones into pearls, acknowledging that their watch was nearing its end and that their time of dominant brilliance was gracefully receding. They did not vanish, but they stepped back, their presence becoming more gentle, more supportive, less demanding of attention, allowing the vast, velvety canvas of the sky to prepare for a new artist's touch. The moon, now low on the western horizon, was a sliver of its former self, its light bleached of all silver and now the color of old, polished bone, a quiet, melancholic, and beautiful luminescence that seemed to pour out the last of its soothing song, a final, lingering note in the lullaby of the night. In the valley, this shift was felt as a change in the quality of the silence. The profound, absolute stillness of the night's core began to relax its hold, not into noise, but into a different kind of quiet, a quiet that was expectant, patient, and full of a gentle potential. It was the quiet of a breath held not in suspense, but in anticipation of a beautiful and inevitable release. The world was not yet waking, but it was beginning to dream of wakefulness, a dream within the great dream of the night. Section 22 of 30. Inside the cottage, Elara, enmeshed in the deepest layers of her restorative sleep, began to respond to this cosmic shift on a level far beneath consciousness. Her body, that exquisite instrument finely tuned to the rhythms of the earth, started its own gentle internal transition. The incredibly slow delta wave rhythms of her brain, the waves of deepest, dreamless sleep, began to be interspersed with the slightly quicker, rolling patterns of theta waves, the waves of dreaming, of hypnagogic imagery, and of profound intuition. It was as if her mind, having been fully immersed in the void of pure restoration, was now beginning to stir, to create again, but slowly, gently, like a painter first washing a canvas with a soft, neutral tint before applying any color. Her breathing, which had been so slow and shallow as to be almost undetectable, deepened almost imperceptibly. Each inhalation drew in a fraction more of the cool, pre-dawn air that was now ever so slightly charged with the potential of the new day, and each exhalation was a fraction longer, a fraction more conscious, as if her body was practicing for its return to the waking world, but without any urgency, without any break in the perfect peace that held her. The physiological processes of intense repair began to slow their frantic, microscopic pace. The flood of human growth hormone, which had been coursing through her system, repairing muscle and bone, began to ebb to a steady maintenance flow. The diligent immune cells, which had been patrolling with heightened alertness, settled into a more routine vigilance. Her body temperature, which had dropped to its lowest point, now began its achingly slow climb back toward its waking level, a rise of mere tenths of a degree that was nonetheless a significant internal signal that the night was turning. Yet, crucially, this transition was not a jarring shift. It was a seamless, graceful, and languid movement, like a slow-motion film of a flower turning its face toward a sun that has not yet risen. There was no tension, no anxiety about the coming day. The peace that had been built so carefully and experienced so deeply was not shattered. It was simply changing its form, becoming a different kind of peace. The peace of a task completed, of rest well spent, of a soul prepared to face the light because it had been perfectly comforted by the dark. Elara's spirit was like a deep well that had been filled to the brim with silent, cool water. Now that water was perfectly still, its surface a flawless mirror, ready to reflect whatever the new day would bring, but itself remaining deep, calm, and unchanged at its core. Section 23 of 30. In this liminal space between the depths of night and the hint of dawn, Elara's dreams evolved once more, becoming a beautiful bridge between the wordless communion of the deep night and the narrative structures of the waking mind. She dreamed she was walking again, but this time the path was familiar. It was the same path from her cottage to the creek, but in the dream, it was overlaid with a soft, golden light, as if the moon and the sun had agreed to shine together in a perfect, harmonious blend. She saw her own footprints from the evening before, impressed in the soft moss, and instead of being a sign of her past seeking, they felt like a part of the path itself, a natural feature, as integral as the roots of the trees or the stones in the creek. She walked to the flat stone where she had sat and, in the dream, she found herself already sitting there, as if her seeking self and her found self were existing simultaneously, 2 points on a circle that had now connected. The creek in her dream was not just water, and not just light, but a flowing, liquid song. And the song it sang was the verse, the entire verse, not as words, but as music. In peace was a deep, resonant, cello-like note that underpinned everything. I will lie down and sleep was a soft, melodic phrase that rose and fell like a gentle sigh. For you alone, O Lord, was a series of clear, bell-like tones that rang through the air, pure and unwavering. Make me dwell in safety was the final, resolving chord, a deep, warm, major chord that seemed to vibrate not just in the air, but in the very stone she sat on, in the trees, in her own chest, until everything in the dream world was humming with this single, peaceful, resolved frequency. This was the dream of integration. It was her subconscious mind, her soul weaving the lesson of the night into the very fabric of her being, translating an intellectual understanding and a felt experience into a core, unshakable truth that would now be a part of her, as fundamental as her heartbeat. She was not just hearing the promise. In the dream, she was the promise. She was the peace lying down. She was the safety in which she dwelt. She was the note in the divine song. It was a dream of wholeness, a final blessing from the depths of the night, sealing the work that had been done. Section 24 of 30. As this dream of integration unfolded within Elara's mind, the external world continued its graceful, slow-motion pivot toward the new day. The subtle, gray ink drop in the eastern sky had now spread, diluting the blackness to a deep, rich navy blue, a color that felt like the velvety lining of a sacred box. On the horizon, a single, thin line of lighter, pearlescent gray appeared, a razor-thin incision between the dark earth and the dark sky, a promise of division, of definition, of a world about to be revealed once more. This faint line had an immediate, though gentle, effect on the life of the valley. The first bird, the one who had offered that single, experimental chirp hours before, now felt the shift in its tiny, feathered body. It did not burst into song, but it stirred within its nest, a bundle of fluffed feathers and closed eyes, and let out a soft, sleepy peep, a sound that was less a note and more a question. Is it time? A moment later, from a different tree, another bird answered with a similar, soft, questioning sound. This was not the dawn chorus, but its prelude, the orchestra members quietly tapping their music stands, clearing their throats, preparing their instruments, creating a soft rustle of anticipation that was itself a kind of quiet music. The air, which had been so utterly still, developed the faintest, most delicate of movements, a zephyr so gentle it could only be felt by the dewdrops it caused to tremble on the tips of the grass blades. making them shimmer like a million suspended diamonds in the fading starlight. The scent of the air began to change, too. The heavy, cool fragrance of night-blooming flowers and damp earth began to be subtly infused with a greener, sharper scent. The smell of chlorophyll, of leaves preparing for photosynthesis, of a world getting ready to breathe in a new way. Everything was shifting, but with a slowness and a reverence that honored the sanctity of the retreating night. It was a communal planetary awakening, conducted with a grace and patience that the human world had largely forgotten. A reminder that every transition, even the daily miracle of dawn, can be a peaceful, gentle process when one is in harmony with the rhythm of the universe. Section 25 of 30. Within Elara's cottage, the final acts of the night's sacred ministry were being performed. The deep, velvety darkness that had filled the room was now softening, retreating from the window first, as the nascent gray light of the approaching dawn began to press, gently but persistently, against the glass. The familiar shapes of the table, the chair, the water pitcher, which had been mere suggestions in the absolute dark, now began to emerge with more definition, their edges becoming visible, not with the sharp clarity of day, but with the soft, blurred edges of a charcoal drawing. They were returning to their daytime identities, but they seemed to carry with them the memory of the night's peace, their forms imbued with a quiet dignity. Elara's own body was completing its journey through the cycles of sleep. She was now in the phase of REM sleep where dreams are most vivid and the brain is almost as active as when awake, yet the body is held in a state of profound paralysis, a safety mechanism to prevent one from acting out their dreams. Her eyes, beneath their closed lids, darted back and forth, following the unfolding scenes of her inner world. The golden path, the musical creak, the integrated self. Her breathing was deeper and more regular, and her heart rate had increased slightly from its deep sleep low, now beating a steady, strong, and confident rhythm, the rhythm of a heart that has been restored and is ready for whatever comes next. A deep, pervasive warmth was spreading through her limbs, the result of her rising core temperature and the increased blood flow, a physical sensation of well-being that was the body's own confirmation of its restored state. She began to stir, not a jerky, anxious awakening, but a slow, luxurious, stretching uncurling, like a cat in a sunbeam, though the sun had not yet risen. A finger twitched, a toe stretched against the soft blanket. Her head turned slowly on the pillow, her cheek nuzzling into the cool, soft cotton. These were the first gentle movements of return, the soul slowly re-inhabiting the body fully, reacquainting itself with its physical vessel after its journey through the formless realms of deep sleep and dream. It was a reunion, and like all good reunions, it was filled with a sense of deep, comfortable, and loving familiarity. She was not being pulled from sleep. She was being gently, lovingly, invited back to the waking world by a body and a spirit that were now perfectly aligned, rested, and at peace. The long, healing night was drawing to a close, but its gift, the profound and embodied peace of the psalm, remained, woven now into the very fiber of her being, a permanent possession, a quiet light that would now shine from within her through all the days to come. Section 26 of 30. And so, as the nascent dawn continued its infinitely patient and gentle unveiling of the world, the valley itself began to emerge from the unified, dark dream of the night, not with a sudden, jarring shock, but with a slow, graceful, and reverent unfolding, like a flower opening its petals to the first hint of the sun's warmth, each movement a prayer of gratitude for the night's rest and a welcome to the day's potential. The deep, rich navy blue that had softened the absolute blackness of the sky was now itself being diluted, washed through with subtle watercolor hues of violet and a deep, dusty rose, colors that seemed to bloom from within the very fabric of the atmosphere, as if the sky were a great, living canvas and the dawn was breathing color onto it from the inside out. The thin, razor-sharp line of pearlescent gray on the horizon had now thickened into a band, a soft, luminous smudge of light that held within it the promise of all colors, a palette of potential from which the day would soon paint its masterpiece. This light did not yet reach the floor of the valley, which remained pooled in a soft, blue-tinted gloom, a last, cherished reservoir of the night's essence, but it touched the highest points first, the way water slowly fills a basin. The crest of the eastern ridge, where the old, wind-gnarled pines stood as silent witnesses to countless such transitions, was now faintly gilded, each needle on the highest branches etched in a fine, almost imperceptible line of gold, as if dipped in molten light. This was the first, direct touch of the new day, a benediction bestowed upon the highest and most patient of the valley's sentinels. Below, the world remained a study in soft-focus monochrome, but the details within that monochrome were becoming clearer, more defined. The individual forms of trees could be distinguished from the general mass of the forest. The winding path of the creek was a slightly darker ribbon of movement through the mist that now began to rise from the water, ghostly tendrils of condensation that curled and twisted in the still, cool air, the earth's own breath released in a silent, graceful exhalation. This mist was not a blanket that obscured, but a veil that softened, adding a layer of mystery and gentle beauty to the landscape, a final, dreamy filter between the deep peace of the night and the clear definitions of the day. The air itself felt different. It was still cool, still fresh with the memory of the dark, but it had lost the deep, penetrating chill of the midnight hours, and now held a soft, neutral temperature that was neither cold nor warm, a perfect, balanced breath between the exhalation of the night and the inhalation of the day. It was a moment of perfect, poised transition, a world balanced on the delicate cusp between two states of being, and it held all the quiet, potent magic inherent in such liminal spaces. Section 27 of 30. Within the soft, grayish light now permeating Elara's cottage, the final, gentle negotiation between sleep and wakefulness was taking place within her. Her body, having drunk its fill from the deep, restorative well of the night, was now naturally, organically, completing its cycles of rest. The vivid, integrative dreams of the musical creek and the golden path had subsided, their work of weaving the night's peace into the fabric of her being now complete. She had drifted back into a lighter, more surface-level sleep, a soft, fuzzy state of semi-awareness where the boundaries between the inner world of dreams and the outer world of the cottage were thin and permeable. In this state, she was beginning to become aware of external sensations, but they were not the harsh, demanding sensations of the day. They were soft, welcoming, and comforting. She felt the profound, yielding softness of her pillow against her cheek, a sensation of such gentle support it felt like being cradled by a cloud. She felt the warm, comforting weight of the blankets over her, a cozy, swaddling pressure that made her feel safe and protected. She heard, not as a separate noise, but as a part of her own breathing, the faint, sweet, and increasingly confident songs of the waking birds outside her window. Their chorus was no longer just a few sleepy peeps, but a proper, though still soft, melody, a liquid, bubbling stream of sound that spoke of dewdrops and emerging worms and the simple, uncomplicated joy of being alive to see another morning. This sound did not startle her. It called to her, a gentle, natural alarm clock that was in perfect harmony with her own internal rhythms. Her breathing deepened further, becoming the full, diaphragmatic breaths of a body that is fully oxygenated and ready for movement. A long, slow, luxurious stretch began in her toes, a ripple of muscle release that traveled up through her calves, her thighs, her torso, and finally into her arms and fingers, extending all the way to the very tips. It was a stretch of pure, unadulterated pleasure, the body's way of re-inhabiting itself fully, of tasting its own strength and flexibility after hours of perfect stillness. Her eyelids, which had been the shutters on the vibrant cinema of her dreams, now fluttered, the lashes trembling against her skin. They did not yet open, but behind them, her eyes, having finished their rapid darting of REM sleep, now rolled slowly, peacefully, as if gazing at the backs of her own lids, which were now tinged with a faint, rosy glow from the light seeping into the room. There was no struggle in this awakening, no desperate grasping for consciousness, no frantic mental cataloging of the day's duties. It was a graceful, gentle surfacing, like a diver rising slowly and smoothly from the deep, silent, pressurized depths of the ocean toward the shimmering, sun-dappled surface, feeling the water become warmer and lighter with every foot of ascent, a return to the air that was as natural and welcome as the dive itself had been necessary. Section 28 of 30. As Elara hovered in this beautiful, hypnopompic state, the threshold between the kingdom of sleep and the land of the awake, the memories of the night began to coalesce within her, not as a linear narrative, but as a settled, foundational feeling, a new and permanent layer of her soul. The frantic seeking, the walk to the creek, the whisper of the wind, the steadfastness of the stars, the deep, healing void of sleep, the dream of the musical verse. All of these experiences had been processed and distilled by the alchemy of the night into a single, profound, and unshakable knowing. It was the knowing captured in the psalm, but it was no longer just words on a page or a thought in her mind. It was a living, breathing reality etched into her very cells. She knew, with a certainty that bypassed intellect, that peace was not a destination to be reached, but a state to be inhabited. She knew that safety was not the absence of danger, but the presence of a trust so deep it could hold any fear, any worry, and dissolve it in its vast, calm waters. She knew that the divine was not a distant figure in a faraway heaven, but the very ground of her being, the silent, loving presence in the creek's murmur, in the tree's sigh, in the star's gaze, and in the quiet, steady beating of her own heart. This knowing did not feel new. It felt like a remembering, like recalling a truth she had always known but had temporarily forgotten in the busyness of her days. It was the rediscovery of her own native language, the language of peace and trust. And with this remembering came a quiet, confident joy, a joy that was not dependent on external circumstances, but that sprang from this internal, unassailable wellspring. It was the joy of a soul that has come home to itself, that has remembered its place in the great, benevolent order of the universe. She felt a soft, gentle smile form on her lips, a smile that was not for anyone else, but was the simple, outward expression of this inner, settled joy. It was the smile of the psalm itself, the smile of one who lies down in peace and awakens still held in that same peace, a peace that had now proven itself stronger than the night, a peace that would now travel with her into the day. The night's work was complete. It had not just rested her body. It had reoriented her soul, turning it like a compass needle back toward its true north, which was this ever-present, ever-available peace. Section 29 of 30. The light in the room was now strong enough to see clearly. The soft, gray gloom had been entirely replaced by a clean, pale, silvery light, the light of a sky not yet touched by the direct rays of the sun, but fully illuminated by its hidden presence. The objects in the cottage, the table, the chair, the pitcher, the bowl of stones, had fully returned to their daytime forms, but they seemed to hold a new significance. They were not just functional items anymore. They were silent companions who had shared the sacred space of the night with her, witnesses to her transformation. They seemed to glow with a gentle inner light, each one a touchstone that could, if she looked at it during a busy moment later in the day, recall her to this feeling of perfect peace. The window was no longer a black square, but a framed picture of the waking world. She could see the deep green of the pine trees, the lighter, fresher green of the new grass in the meadow, the silver gray of the drifting mist over the creek. The world outside was drenched in color again, but the colors were soft, muted, and pure, washed clean by the darkness and not yet intensified by the full strength of the sun. It was a world seen through eyes that had also been washed clean, eyes that were seeing not just with optical nerves, but with a soul refreshed. The bird song was now a full, vibrant, and complex symphony, no longer a tentative prelude but a confident, joyous overture to the day, a celebration of light and life that filled the air with an infectious, cheerful energy. Yet, to Elara's ears, it was not a noise that demanded anything from her. It was simply the day's own music, and she could listen to it from within the quiet, centered space she inhabited, appreciating its beauty without feeling the need to rush out and join its frantic pace. She could hear the creek, too, its sound clearer and brighter now, no longer the deep, subterranean hum of the deep night, but the cheerful, chattering gurgle of the daytime, a sound that spoke of movement and purpose and the constant, graceful flow of life. All of these sounds, these sights, wove together into a welcoming committee for her awakening consciousness, a beautiful world inviting her to rejoin it, but on new terms, terms defined by the peace she now carried within her like a precious, unquenchable light. Section 30 of 30. And so Elara opened her eyes. It was not a jerky, reluctant opening, but a slow, deliberate, and peaceful unveiling, as if she were gently drawing back the curtains on a beautiful and anticipated view. The light, though bright after the long darkness, did not sting or cause her to squint. It was received by eyes that were rested and ready, and it felt warm and welcoming on her retinas. The first thing she saw was the familiar, rough-hewn wooden beam of her ceiling, and she looked at it with a sense of deep, affectionate familiarity, as if greeting an old friend. She took a deep, slow, conscious breath, drawing the cool, fresh morning air deep into her lungs, air that tasted of pine and damp earth and new beginnings. She held it for a moment, savoring it, feeling the life-giving oxygen spread through her body, and then she released it in a long, slow, contented sigh. She felt different. The bodily fatigue was gone, yes, replaced by a pleasant, humming vitality. But more than that, the spiritual fatigue, the background hum of anxiety that had been her constant companion, was silent. In its place was a vast, quiet, spacious peace. It was not an empty peace, but a full, rich, alive peace. A peace that could contain the bird song and the creek's chatter and the coming demands of the day without being disturbed. She lay there for several long, luxurious minutes, not thinking, not planning, simply being. She was simply feeling the weight of her body on the mattress, the softness of the linen on her skin, the gentle rise and fall of her own breath. She was practicing the art of dwelling, of inhabiting the present moment without any desire to be anywhere else, doing anything else. She was dwelling in safety. The verse was alive in her, no longer a promise to be believed, but a reality to be lived. "In peace I will lie down and sleep," she whispered, her voice soft and husky with sleep, but clear and certain. "And in peace I have awakened. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." The words were no longer a plea or a declaration of intent. They were a statement of fact, a testimony to the grace she had received. With another deep, centering breath, she slowly, smoothly sat up. The movement was fluid and graceful, without stiffness or hesitation. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, and her bare feet met the cool, smooth wood of the floor. The sensation was grounding, connecting her firmly to the earth, to her home, to this new day. She stood, her body feeling strong, balanced, and alive. She walked to the window and looked out upon the valley, now fully revealed in the soft morning light. It was the same valley, yet it was entirely new, seen through the eyes of a heart that had been remade in the quiet workshop of the night. She knew the day would have its challenges, its moments of noise and haste, but she also knew, with a certainty that would not be shaken, that the deep, resonant peace of the creek, the stars, and the silent, watching hills was now a part of her. She carried the sanctuary within her. The long, healing night was over, but its gift was eternal. Elara was awake. She was at peace, and she was ready, not to conquer the day, but to greet it with a quiet heart and a spirit that had finally, fully come home.